Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fritz Kuhnlens, and welcome to our very first installment of our Alumni Webinar Series. Our Alumni Webinar Series is dedicated to helping alumni tackle the challenges of finding success in music and the arts. Everything from budgeting to moving across the country to better understanding new technologies in our daily professional routines. We hope that this series gives you tools, tips, and new perspectives on how to approach the ever-increasing fast-paced world. As it is our first installment of this webinar, I want to discuss the webinar's format and set any ground rules for the discussion. This webinar is sponsored by the Berklee Office of Alumni Affairs. The Office of Alumni Affairs is dedicated to building and connecting the vast communities of college and conservatory alumni worldwide. Every year we hold over 100 in-person events from LA to New York to London to Tokyo, designed to connect alumni from across music and the arts. Be sure to check out our website for news, alumni profiles, and event updates from around the community. Today's webinar is meant to provide tips, tricks, and advice for alumni from the college and conservatory communities. The format is 40-minute discussion followed by a 15 to 20-minute Q&A. Our Q&A will be curated by our Alumni Affairs staff, so please use the chat feature located in the bottom of the control panel to deliver your questions, and we will prompt the questions during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please note that our presenters consist of faculty, staff, and fellow alumni from around the industry. The views and opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the college policy or position of the Berklee College of Music and/or the Boston Conservatory at Berklee. In a couple of moments, we will welcome our special guest to discuss today's topic. Today, we will be discussing budgets, how to build and how not to build a successful budget for the artist, musician, dancer, professional. Today's guest is Larry Isaacson, a former trombonist who began his career at the age of 19 performing as an extra with the Chicago Symphony at Carnegie Hall. Lawrence Isaacson has performed worldwide in concert and on recordings with many of America's finest ensembles, including the Empire Brass Quintet, the San Francisco Symphony, the Chicago Symphony, the Boston Pops, Boston Symphony Chamber Players, Detroit Symphony, Grand Park Symphony, and the San Diego Symphony. He has performed in all musical mediums, including television, radio, commercials, and recordings, and traveled extensively for concerts to Europe, Japan, Canada, and most of the United States. Now in his 34th year at Boston Conservatory at Berklee, Mr. Isaacson has served in numerous capacities over those years. These include Professor of Trombone, Chair of the Brass Department, Associate Director of the Music Division, Chair of Woodwinds and Chair of Strings. His current teaching duties include Foundations and Instrumental Studies for Brass, Brass Seminar, coaching brass chamber music, teaching private trombone lessons, and in addition, conducting the Spectrum Project, Boston Conservatory Dance Productions, Brass Ensemble, Tromboco, and Orchestra Repertoire class. Additional conducting duties include an annual concert at the Aspen Music Festival and 10 years as music director and conductor of Symphony Nova. Mr. Isaacson is a former faculty member of the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, or here in Boston we call that MIT, New England Conservatory, Boston University, Tufts University, University of New Hampshire, Mannes College of Music, McMaster University, and Boston University's Tanglewood Institute. But today, he will be speaking to us as an avid investor for over the last 30 years. In that time, Mr. Isaacson has learned as much what to do and what not to do. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic over and the presentation to Lawrence Isaacson and Budgeting for Success. Hi, Larry. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Fritz. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Larry Isaacson, and I'm professor of music at the Boston Conservatory at Berklee. I've taught here for 35 years and been an administrator for 20 years. I wanted to share with you that I have lost count of the number of times a student has come to me with a wild look in their eyes as they approached graduation. It was partly about their career in general, but also about their finances. That's what got me interested in this subject, and I've been doing my best to help the students ever since. This is the first of 3 webinars I'll be doing on musicians and money. Today is on budgeting. The next 2 will be on investing and taxes, all things that will help you to thrive financially as artists. Feel free to send questions in the chat feature at any time during this webinar, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the session. So let's start. What is a budget? It's a written record of the money that flows in and out of your household. And you've probably thought about what a budget is in the past. So I'll tell you that for many years, I tried to lose weight just by eating less, but it never seemed to work. It wasn't until I tracked my calorie intake that I was able to budge the needle on the scale. A budget is very similar. If you just try to keep track of all of it in your head and spend less, I'm doing that with quotes, you're bound to spend more than you think you are spending. It's often shocking the first time someone runs a budget for themselves. They had no idea that their money was going where it was going each month. It's also a plan for managing your own money in a way that best meets your personal needs and wants. Unfortunately, musicians tend to do things backwards. We focus on our careers, make whatever money we can, and try to make ends meet with whatever money comes in at the end of the month. That's actually a recipe for disaster. With no plan other than a reactive one, you'll be destined to be behind financially. One of the smartest things you can do early on in your career is to set up a budget and stick to it. Learning how to manage a budget will keep you from making costly mistakes. As a musician, or really anyone who's at the beginning of a career, you won't have lots of disposable income to play with. If you plan poorly, you may quickly find yourself in debt. But if you're thoughtful with how you manage your money, you'll have every chance for success. So why budget? Well, budgets are a necessity to control your personal spending, savings, and debt. It will increase your savings, allowing you to plan for the future. It allows you to achieve your personal goals. Many individuals don't realize they are overspending until they are deeply in debt. Living beyond their means is a dangerous practice, and it's very hard to get out of debt once you're there. Credit cards and easy access to funds makes it way too easy to be mindless about your spending. So you have to be more careful with it than your credit cards might allow you to be. And the last thing, which is always shocking when we first hear it, is that the loudest voices in finance come from corporations that do not have your best interest in mind. So in other words, credit card companies, big box stores, your bank, they're in business. They're trying to make money off of you. And they make money every time you make a payment, particularly if there's interest on top of that. Your job is to fight that and to not listen so much to what they're asking you to do. So is money that important? Well, money brings happiness. Money problems bring unhappiness. The absence of a budget is one of the greatest contributors to stress about money. The top reason, I'm sorry to say, for divorce is financial. Finances affect everything else in your life, including your health. Money problems can stay with you the rest of your life. And money successes will also stay with you for the rest of your life. So what stands in your way? Money management can stir up any of the following feelings. You can read those. I don't need to read them for you. Remember that these are just feelings. Feel them, let them go. I promise you that they will disappear once you get a handle on all of this. So here are the steps to making a budget. I'll flesh all of these out in the next bunch of slides. So you'll track your actual income and expenses for a month. That's my suggestion. That's how you get started. It's actually pretty easy to do that. And based on that, you'll estimate your income and your expenses going forward. I'll also show you how to do that. And then have your budget support your financial goals by including actual and unexpected expenses. And finally, as you get good at this, you'll want to review and revise monthly, because the truth is your budget does change. It's a living document. It's not something you just create and it stays the same. So starting a budget. Let's start by tracking all of your sources of income and expenses, ideally for a month. It would look something like this. It's a very simple spreadsheet. You have a date on the left, the item that you have either earned income on or spent money on, and then either the income or expense on the right. I'll share a blank version of this at the end of the webinar if you want to get started in this way. It's the easiest way to just dip your toe into creating a budget. As you get a little better, you're going to want to list all of your sources of income and figure out, what am I bringing in? You have freelance income, teaching income, non-performing income, and we can break it down. We can break this all down further with the income, as you see here, and also expenses. Later on, you can do this in a more organized fashion, maybe on a spreadsheet or in a money program online. But for now, let's just get started. Maybe grab a piece of paper and a pen and start thinking about, what do I bring in? What kind of money am I bringing in each month? And is that something I can figure out? I can come up with those numbers. You may not be able to, and that's what that previous spreadsheet was about. So it could look like this. Your freelance income might be monthly, that number. Your teaching studio might be that. Your non-performing income. Everybody's going to be totally different. It just depends on you as a musician, whether you're playing more, whether you're doing, whether you're teaching more, whether you're not playing and you're doing other things. You could be doing music production, music recording, music business, nonprofit arts management. Those are all non-performing, but these are all forms of income. And you can certainly break it down any way you like in a sheet that I'll send you later, or that you'll have access to. But this is a way to just start to look at it. The math has obviously been done. The monthly is multiplied by 12 and it just does it. And then at the bottom, there's a total income, a monthly income and a yearly income. And then you have your expenses. I wish this list was as short as the 3 that I had for income. And you might have 5 or 10 for income, but expenses is many, many more. There are essential expenses. These are fixed, things like rent and your student loans. They're due on the same day and usually for the same amount. Then you have essential expenses that are variable, like your electric bill and your grocery bill. The totals of these fluctuate each month. And finally, the non-essential expenses like clothing and your gym membership. These are things that you could live without in a pinch. So let's look a little more carefully at each of these. The essential fixed, the things that happen on the same day at the same amount, things like your rent or mortgage, insurances, taxes, your cable bill, telephone, things like that. Then essential things that you must have that are variable. So obviously when you go shopping for food or your electric bill, or if something happens with your car, but you still need your car. And then there are the non-essential expenses. Again, things you don't necessarily need to have. They're not musts for survival, but you definitely would want to have them in some way, or you might want them. Things like a gym membership, repairing your instrument lessons, etc. Now that would start to look like this. So this budget is my best guess at what a single person, now don't have a heart attack, what a single person can live on in one of the larger music cities in the US, New York, Chicago, Boston, LA, Philadelphia, and others. Hopefully you are making more than this or living in a city with a lower cost of living. Some people can live on much less for a time, but it's not a sustainable lifestyle if you're in one of the larger cities. Whatever the number is, you'll end up running this budget for yourself with your personal needs and situations, so don't feel tied to these numbers. Some people have extenuating circumstances too, either for or against them, like living at home, which is of course for you financially, or maybe you've started a family, which is a little more of a challenge financially. Start listing what you think you earn and spend each month in the simple format that I showed you earlier. Like hearing your recorded voice for the first time, this exercise can initially be very, very shocking. So tracking your budget. I'm suggesting that you start today. You could start tomorrow, but procrastination won't really help you here. You would just start tracking today in whatever way you feel comfortable. Um, Tracking everything that comes in and out of your accounts really for 1 month. Keep a list somewhere that is easy for you to use so that you don't forget, a piece of paper on your desk or in your pocket, or a spreadsheet on your computer. It could be notes on your phone. This will give you a really good idea of what your budget would look like on an annual basis. Simply multiply everything by 12 to get to a yearly budget. Don't be surprised if you're earning less and spending more than you thought. The most important thing is to get a handle on all of this. Changes are easy once you can see it all in front of you. If you have any surpluses at the end of the month, when you've compared your income to your expenses, then you're actually running a budget that's called in the black. And that's a good thing. You actually want to be running in the black if you can. If you have a deficit, if you have no money at the end of the month, you're actually doing what's called running in the red. And running in the red is problematic. So try to leave some extra money in there for surprises so that you couldn't have planned for. A month here or there that is behind is fine, but being behind on a regular basis will put you into debt fast, and you want to hold and you want to avoid that, at all costs. You want to review on a monthly basis, especially when you begin the process. So this was an exercise, just starting to think about, what do I make? What do I spend? Keeping track of your income and expenses can be a challenge at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's almost a habit, creating a new habit. You'll spend only minutes each week on this task. It's really not that much time at all. So there are many budgeting options. I started with the most basic, which is just kind of writing down, what am I bringing in? What am I spending? But you can actually create a first budget, a very easy first budget. The next step is what I call an early career budget. Those are maybe a little clunky, usually free or almost free, but they do have limitations as you grow into your career in adulthood. And then your full career budget is something that can really manage everything for you, and it'll cost you a little bit, not a lot, but it will cost you something. So there are some great tools on the web that help you track your money with little effort. They will not only track your budget, but also your net worth, allowing you to do all of your financial tasks in one place. The early career and full career budget will both do that. I highly recommend that you start using the most advanced tool that you can afford, which also looks user-friendly to you. Obviously, if it's not user-friendly, you're not going to use it. Your finances will get more and more complicated as you age, so try to get something that will grow with you. If at all possible, you want to avoid swapping software down the road. It's not impossible, but it just adds a little bit of time for you at some point. So your first easy budget would really just simply be a spreadsheet. You can set up a spreadsheet that will track your income and expenses. It's a good way to start to understand the process, and you could soon move over to one of the more comprehensive options that I'll talk about in a moment. But I would start with a spreadsheet just to get familiar with the process. It's sort of a quick and nasty way to figure out how much you bring in and how much you're spending. So I'll actually supply a spreadsheet for you at the end of this presentation that you are welcome to use to put together your financial picture. It'll look like this. Remember, we had the income at the top, but I'm now breaking it down into many more different kinds of incomes and what they might look like. For freelance income, it's not just freelance, but it could be other music jobs. You could be a contractor. Who knows what you're doing as a freelance musician? Now, keep in mind, you may have a job. You may already have your first job with benefits and all the rest of it. That would just go under non-performing income. You would just put it in there. I was assuming, and maybe wrongly so, that many on the phone are freelancing in one way or another. But either way you do it, it still could go into one of these columns and one of these rows, and you would still add it up. It would still come out the same, and you would see what your income was. So you could break it up in that way. So to use this, start listing what you think you earn in each category. You'll be using the blank monthly column, which is on the sort of on the left there, the blank one. As you enter numbers in there, the yearly column will self-populate, as will the totals, because I've already done the math for you. Two columns on the right are estimates that I've guessed at. Your numbers will of course be different. I also know that many of your gigs aren't going to be regular and that there are quiet times of the year when there's no performing income. By tracking your income for a month or longer, you'll be able to be much more accurate with what you're bringing in on an annual basis. Then take your best guess at what you spend each month. The numbers in the right two columns, again, are pretty traditional for many of the expense items. So if you aren't sure about what you spend, you could use these numbers for now until your picture becomes clearer to you. Of course, rent, that's all over the place. But utilities, renter's insurance, all of those things are actually pretty consistent. I have Zipcar listed under transportation at 0 because you're either going to own a car or use Zipcar. Or use public transportation or some combination, and you'll figure that out and you'll put your numbers in. You have to eat, and you're either eating out or you're eating in, and it's good to be able to see the difference between those two. And then you have here are more expenses. You have professional expenses, all the things you do if you're a performing musician or if you're an artist who's not performing but involved in some sort of professional work as an artist. And then of course, personal expenses, which we all have, clothing, disability insurance we'll talk about in the next webinar, but I recommend it. Gym membership, haircuts, laundry, all those things are personal expenses. And then you have medical expenses, you have debt payments. Some of you probably have student loans, maybe many of you. You may have a credit card loan. There may be other debts, personal loans, things like that. And then personal savings as well. Hopefully you'll be putting money away every month into your retirement, into your non-retirement, and into an emergency fund. Those last three, again, we'll talk about in the investing webinar, but at least it has to show up here. And then the bottom 5 lines are all the totals. Your gross income, which is the total income, no deductions, and then your total income minus your professional expenses, which we take out because those are going to be tax deductible. We deal with that later. Then we see what your taxes are, and at the end of the day, you see what your net surplus is and your net deficit is. So once you do this, so this is a pretty easy way to start to see how you're doing. And at the end, at the bottom, it'll just tell you whether you are in the positive or in the negative. And then you can start to look at it and figure out, wait a minute, I'm eating out a lot. What if I ate out a little bit less? We're going to get into all that now, but this is a great way to start, and I'm going to supply this for you, this exact one, and you're welcome to use it and download it as many times as you want. So your early career budget, after you've done the spreadsheet, you might want to go to something else that's either free or almost free. So there are some great products that will get you through the first few years of your career. They're all online resources and cost very little to run. You'll be able to make a budget, track your income and expenses, as well as your investments automatically. I've personally worked with Mint a little bit and find it somewhat clunky, but it's a very good starter tool. As your finances get more complicated, you would want to consider one from the next category. So these are what I call full career budgets, Banktivity and Quicken. You'll notice Banktivity is for Mac and Quicken is for both Mac and PC. As you get further into your career, you may need a more powerful program that can track your money more easily and allows you more sorting, budgeting, and investing options. These and other similar products are good choices for getting you through much of your career. I'm on a Mac, so I use the IGG software Banktivity. It works well and has lots of functionality. I think you'll find Quicken to be just as full service as well. For all of these programs, there's going to be an investment of a few hours of your time to set them up. But once you've done that, most of the functions will be automatic, leaving you with only a few minutes each week to update information. Personally, I'm a little neurotic, so I have a habit of looking at my stuff once a day to make sure there are no errors, that there are no checks that went through that shouldn't have, or something happened with my credit card, or somebody billed something on my credit card they shouldn't have. But that's a little over the top. Most people would agree that's a bit much. You can check these things monthly when the statements come in, and you balance each account. If you're willing to spend just a few hours each month on your finances and continuing to learn more, you'll find that the payoff is huge. So the advantages to budgeting software, and I would say this is early and mature career, both, all of those things besides the spreadsheet. They download your transactions automatically, your banking, your credit cards, your mutual funds, stocks, mortgage, everything. So to be able to live your life, write checks, use your debit card, and make other transactions without having to write anything down is a blessing. It saves you so much time. It automatically tracks your budget. So once you've run this spreadsheet budget I gave you, you're going to have numbers. Let's say you spend $500 a month in groceries or $300 a month in groceries. You would put that into the budget. And then as you're spending money each month, you would see how you're doing. And the software would very quickly show you whether you're ahead or behind. These also track your net worth, which is basically what you own and what you owe. And we're going to talk about that in the next webinar. But it's very useful to see that number. These are not expensive, and just imagine the reduced workload that you're going to have here. I think Banktivity is as much as $69, and I think it's a one-time. Quicken might be $49, but it's every year, something like that. So they're not exorbitantly expensive. And as we said, Mint is, I think, free, at least initially. The software can also notify you of your upcoming bills and recent transactions so that you don't forget to pay your bills, because that can always be expensive if you have to pay late fees. Some allow you to enter receipts immediately via a phone app so that you can, when you're on the fly, you're on the run, you're at a restaurant, you can just enter it in. And it displays everything in easy to understand graphs and charts. Now, you won't be able to put this into set it and forget it mode. You will have to accept that throughout your life, you'll need to spend a few minutes each week looking at your finances, as well as learning a bit more about money in general. Trust me though, this will not take you long and the benefits will be hugely rewarding. So here are some things about managing your money, things that affect the budget, how things are going in and out of your budget. I'm going to assume you know how to pay your bills and balance a checkbook. At a minimum, you're going to want to have a checking account to pay your bills. That term checking account, though, is a bit antiquated at this point, in that many of those accounts are now online and can be paid without actually writing a check. Online banking is an amazing resource, and if you don't do your banking online, you might want to look into it. Bills can be paid easily and even set to be paid monthly with just a few clicks on your keyboard. Credit cards. We love them, we hate them. It's okay to use a credit card, only if you have self-control. In other words, if you pay off your credit card every month and don't carry a balance from month to month, you are using a credit card appropriately. You will build your credit rating and not get into financial trouble. If you carry any debt at all on your cards, stop using them either forever or until you get your spending under control. With interest rates for credit cards running well over 16%, I promise you that you will be the loser in this deal. Remember I said earlier that there are companies that really want you to take money out on credit. Well, credit cards are one of them because they're making 16% on you. Get any debt that you have paid off. Let me say that again. Get any debt that you have paid off as quickly as possible and promise yourself you won't carry a balance ever again. The exception to this is a home mortgage. Everything else should get paid off as soon as possible, including school loans, car loans, and definitely any credit card debt you are currently holding. According to creditcards.com, an average of 43% of consumers carry a balance on their bank credit cards. Not store cards, but Visa, MasterCard, and the like, 43%. That means that an average of 57% do pay off their credit cards every month. Be one of those people who doesn't carry a balance. If you do carry a credit card, paying your bills on time is critical for maintaining as well as improving your financial situation. Paying yourself first. This is a concept that may be new to some of you. In order to ensure that you're able to save and pay off debt, pay yourself first. In other words, instead of putting money towards yourself after you pay your bills, pay you first. That would include debt payments and personal investing, all of which go directly to you in one way or another. And whatever is left goes towards your bills, payments to others, etc. If there is money left over after that, you win. You could then have some play money and either put additional funds towards debt and savings, or you could treat yourself to something nice since you've worked hard and successfully balanced your budget. Poor money management skills. It's an issue. According to cardtrack.com, many Americans struggle with poor money management skills. Most high schools and colleges teach little to no financial knowledge or skills to their students. Most graduates go out into the world with no ability to manage money at all. Compound this with the staggering student loan debt many young people are carrying and a stagnant job market, and the problem becomes clear. You want to live within your means. This is self-explanatory. Spend less than you earn, and you'll be in good shape. And staying out of debt, as I was saying earlier. In Dave Ramsey's book, The Total Money Makeover, A Proven Plan for Financial Fitness, he discusses the fallacy of debt. It is being sold to us all the time, but that's just it. It's being sold to us by people who will benefit from our debt load, like banks, credit cards, and big box stores. They shout loudly how easy it is to get this or that if only we put it on credit. This plan can go downhill quickly, and you will have quite a struggle to get out of debt once you are there. Avoiding debt to begin with is your best road to financial success. And continuing education. If you haven't learned these skills in the classroom, it's important to learn these skills on your own. Isn't it really difficult, you say? Well, actually, no. It will take you some time each month, maybe an hour or two, but it will be time well spent. I'm going to list a bunch of websites, books, and podcasts at the end of this presentation, and also have them available on my website after this webinar. I highly recommend that you commit to reading some of these resources on a regular basis. So what are the ways to improve your finances? I'll bet somebody just chuckled at the win the lottery one. Cut your expenses, make more money. Of course, winning the lottery is always one of the options, and using a budget. So let's break those down a little bit. So if you want to cut your expenses, you could do it with your living situation. You can certainly start, that's your largest expense. Are you spending too much every month? If so, should you consider moving or get a roommate? Remember that the place you live at the start of your career will not be the same place you are living in just a few short years. It is not unusual for people in their 20s to move around several times before they settle into a long-term living situation. As you get your career started, ask yourself these questions. What can I afford for my housing? Would it help to have a roommate? Do I have a family that I need to take care of? Could I do without a car for a while? If so, what neighborhoods would be best for someone in that situation? If you're playing, will I need to practice at home? Eat out less. I started to allude to this earlier. Restaurant food costs you double or triple what it costs you to eat at home. When you are just starting out, this is one of the easiest ways to save money. With that said, though, continue to invest in your career by going out with your friends and coworkers to nurture those relationships. That is an investment that is very worthwhile and a reason to eat out periodically. Are you sure you need to dry clean all of your clothing? So you might want to think about what you can do yourself. Your cable bill, your phone bill, every year or two, you want to consider calling the cable company and the phone company and discuss your plan. Is there one that is more affordable? Can you share a phone plan with somebody else? I personally was able to save in the last year $20 a month on both my cable bill and my phone bill just by calling up and getting a different plan. And it wasn't a reduced plan. It's just that the plans change from year to year. And if you don't call, they just leave you on the plan that you were on. So $20 per month for each of those is $480 in a year. And that's just the first year, right? If it's over 10 years, it's a lot of money. So there are other things too. Clothing, yeah, sorry, you don't need that new blouse or those new pants unless you have budgeted for them. Only buy what you can afford, not what you think you need. Use your budget to help you decide what you can afford. Once you have a budget line for clothing, it'll be very obvious what you can buy. Auto renters and homeowners insurances, first make sure you bundle all your insurances with one company because they give you a discount for doing that, usually 5–10%. Also, no one says that you have to stay with your insurance company forever. Like your phone company and cable company, it's worth checking the competition every few years to see if you're still getting the best deal. Often you can save a few dollars by shopping around. Similarly with health insurance, continue to check annually to make sure you're getting the best deal here too. Once you're out of school or have aged out of your parents' plan at 26, you're on your own. A basic policy costs about $50 a month in Mass, another 25%, so about $65 in New York. Plan for this expense in advance and research your options. State subsidy programs, finding a job that might lead to benefits, etc. Haircuts. Some people get pretty good at either giving themselves a haircut or cutting other people's hair. I'm not suggesting you going into the hair business, but you could save $500 to $1,000 or more each year by not going to a salon. Always comparison shop, which I'll bet if you're on this call, I'll bet you're already doing it. And it's so easy now with online resources. Once you decide you must have something, you must have something and can afford it, make sure you are paying the best price for the item. And monitor your progress each month. This is where your budget comes in. You won't hit your budget perfectly, so monitor how things are going and adjust it as you need. And mistakes happen, but make sure to acknowledge them and commit to not doing them again. Some people do impulse buys, grocery indulgences, things that you really want, special treats. Just be a little careful with that. And then, of course, if you do well, celebrate. Celebrate your milestones. Meet up with a friend. Have a drink or dinner. It's time to celebrate. What about making more money? So instead of cutting your expenses, which is one way to make your budget better, you could make more money. You could bring more money in. And you could find a new job. You could find an additional student. You could get a second job. You could use certain tax credits. In other words, if you're a professional and you're buying things that are tax deductible, that might help you a little bit. Brainstorm ways that could earn you an extra $100 or $200 or even $1,000 a month. Could you give in-home lessons? That's an additional $200 to $300 a month. Depending on where you live and who you market your services to, there are ways if you're always thinking about it. I personally have done Airbnb in my home, which is a great way to make additional money. You could walk dogs, you can cat sit. I mean, it depends on where you are in your career. But there are always creative ways to bring in additional money. Win the lottery. So it is one of the options, but do notice the probability of winning the $100 million lottery is 292 million to 1. Even the $1 million top prize is over 11 million to 1. So the odds are not in your favor, but if you enjoy it, if you want to spend a few dollars on the lottery, that's fine. But just know that the odds are not in your favor of winning big. Let's look at the habits of the wealthy. The people, not the people who you see on the street who are wealthy, but the people who are invisible to you who are wealthy. And there are many of them. There are 11 million millionaires in the United States. And I promise you, you walk past them every day and you have no idea that you're walking past them. And this is why they always buy used cars, never new. They avoid expensive brand name clothing. They'll shop at the off-brand stores. They rent or own a home or apartment that's within their means, not the one that they think they're supposed to be in because of their friends or family. They do invest each year into retirement. They don't depend on an inheritance. It's because there are no guarantees. Most of them have a household budget and stick to it. They spend some time each month working and thinking about their investments, and they carry 2 credit cards or less. So they're not carrying 5 credit cards, 2 or less, and many of them don't carry any. So with a car, just going back to the top, as soon as you drive off the lot, the car loses value. So if you buy a 2-year-old car, a 3-year-old car with 20, 30, 40,000 miles, you've saved a lot of money. We talked about clothing, off-brand outlets like TJ Maxx, Sears, JC Penney's. Housing, owning is better in the long run if you plan to stay in an area for an extended period of time. And remember that most people who are millionaires are just average, who just practice sound financial principles. That was all. So here are some good decisions that I made over the years. I bought a home in Newton and over in my 30s, and I lived in the house for 16 years, and it doubled in value during that time. I actually had roommates in there too, which was an additional feature to that. I also, at age 50, while living in the city, I decided to get rid of my car and use Zipcar. I've used Zipcar for 11 years now in public transportation. I have a 5-minute walk to work. I easily save $5,000. It could be as much as $10,000 because of parking in Boston, amounting to well over $50,000 in 10 years of savings by not having a car. And I use one whenever I want. I just use a Zipcar when I want, or I use Uber, or I use public transportation, but I live in the city. And then self-managing investments. After losing large sums of money several times, and I'll talk about that later, with financial investors early on in my career, I decided to do my own investing. You have to pay 1 to 2% per year in fees, which adds up to quite a bit over many years. But I also wasn't paying for anyone for their advice, good or bad. And it's worked out fine. I just did a lot of reading and it was fine. Some mistakes I made. I bought a new sports car when I was 23 and I got my first big job. Hot off the lot, of course, and then within 3 years I sold it because I moved to Boston and the car didn't work in the snow. And it was expensive. I lost a lot of money on it. Poor investing advice. As I said, in my 20s, there were a couple of people who gave me dreadful advice. I lost about $20,000 with those 2 people. Imagine if I had put that away somewhere. The Lennox home was my grandmother's. In my 30s, I purchased it, and that's 2 hours from where I live. And managing a home that's 2 hours from where you live is very difficult. I lost about $50,000 on that. And in my 40s, I purchased a townhouse in Dover, Mass, which is about 45 minutes from here. Had a very hard time renting it. It was not smart, and I lost another $50,000 on that. Imagine if I had taken all of that money that I had made bad decisions on and put it towards my retirement. It would have been quite a bit of money. So here are the signs of a good budget. Things that you'll look out for. You want to be realistic. It should have flexibility, allow progress towards your goals, be simple, and reflect your values, your financial values. Why do budgets fail? So you'll have to watch for this. You may get a negative attitude. Oh, I don't want to do this, or this isn't working, or whatever. Just stay with it. Stay with it. A lack of motivation, creating habits so that you are doing it on a regular basis. And then some people have unrealistic expectations. Oh, I've got a budget now. I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to be able to really change my situation. No, you'll change your situation, but it's not going to wildly change it. You're just going to get things under control. If you want to learn more, again, I'm going to have this on my website and you'll have access to it. There are podcasts, money podcasts. I think Dave Ramsey's wonderful, and the Money Guys, they're funny, although Dave's pretty funny too. New York Times, you can sign up for a newsletter. You'll get, I think it's once a week. Money Magazine, I would totally recommend getting a subscription. It's about $20 a year. You get a magazine once a month. Just read it cover to cover. Or you could read some books. There are 3 books that are things you could consider looking at. Grab pen and paper if you could. There's my website at the bottom. And that particular link is invisible, so you won't find it by searching around. You have to have that link. So on there are 3 things. The simple monthly tracking spreadsheet that I gave you earlier and showed that to you, which basically is just figuring out what am I spending on this and what am I making And then the full spreadsheet, which was like the 30 or 40 line spreadsheet, which really broke everything out, will allow you to enter numbers once you figure out what you spend in any given month. And then the further reading resources, which I just listed, including a list of money applications, both online and on your computer, that you can use to manage your money. I think they're there, right? Oh, yeah, they're not on that slide, but they are in that. When you go to it online, you'll find it on my website. So that's what I had for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to answering your question. Fritz, I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Larry, so much for the interesting discussion on budgets. I feel like this is something that on a yearly basis, I was keenly listening and trying to grab sort of those tips and tricks. You know, I'm a user of Mint myself, and I could agree with you more in terms of it being a clunky system. So, but you have to find sort of what works for you. So, but we're going to go ahead and open it up to the Q&A now. So, if you wouldn't mind, if you are interested in asking Larry a question, please use the chat feature located in the control panel at the bottom of the control panel under the chat tab to deliver your questions, and we will queue them up for Larry to discuss. So I've got one question so far. I've got a bunch of questions, but I've got our first question, which is, Larry, do you have any recommendations on managing joint expenses with a spouse or a partner? You know, joint credit cards, joint banking, sort of, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it depends on how you and your spouse want to handle your finances. Some couples just commingle everything. And I'm getting this, my instinct is that the question is coming from someone who has not commingled their expenses. But if you have, then it almost doesn't matter. You have a joint checking account, you have joint credit cards and all the rest. But if you're keeping it separate, it's perfectly fine to have either one credit card or a debit card between the two of you that you share. So my girlfriend and I have a debit card, and we put money into it every time we're going on a trip. And then we use that card every time we go out. So it's not, well, you just paid for that and I paid for this, and what do you owe me at the end of the day? We just use the card for everything. Now, we're not married, so we are not commingling our finances. We shouldn't. That would be irresponsible. But once you're married, it's actually a good idea to commingle. Hopefully, you'll stay married, and that so it's no issue at all. But I think there are ways of doing that, and certainly a joint credit card or debit card is one of the ways to do it.
Great. Thank you. Larry, another question. Is it good to have multiple budgets depending on um, sort of differing jobs when you're sort of in between jobs? Is that the time to assess your budget? This is specifically coming from somebody who is a touring musician, and so somewhere between 3 to 6 months out of the year, they're on the road, and it's a very sort of different budget. Is that, I guess the question is should they be depending more on that yearly budget and looking at expenses in a yearly format, or do you suggest having sort of different budgets when you are in different sort of career changes?
Well, I'm assuming the person hasn't lost a job and is sort of in between. It's just sort of the regular pace of 3 to 6 months on the road and then 6 months off the
Exactly.
road. I would think one budget is still the right thing to do. It's just that you may bring in a chunk of the of the income in 3 to 6 months, and so it will just look like it. You won't be able to use the spreadsheet I gave you because it won't multiply by 12 very easily. But if you're using one of the other programs, you just input what you think you're going to make, and it'll flesh it out on a yearly basis based on what the income is. Your expenses really aren't changing. You still got a car, you still got to have clothing, you still have to eat, you still have to pay your rent. So I think just being aware that you have feast and famine in your budget is perfectly fine. But because your expenses really don't change, it's just the income side. I would still use one budget, but just be aware that there will be the feast and famine. The other thing I would say is save for the famine time. So let's just make up numbers. Let's say you make $100,000. I'm just making up numbers in that feast time, but then you make zero money. So that's 6 months. Then you make zero money in 6 months. you might want to put $30,000 away or $40,000 away of that 100 so that when things are quiet, you have money there to pay your bills. So that's another way to look at it. But I think having two budgets is a little confusing because then you have to transfer money between them, and I'm not sure that would work well. So I'd try to go with one.
Okay. I just want to remind everyone that if you are interested in asking Larry a question, you can click on the chat function within the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll want to make sure that you are sending that question to the entire audience and or all organizers if you want the group to be able to see that question. So our next question is, Larry, and you sort of touched on this in the last question a little bit, but how often should you be reorganizing your budget? They mention in the question that you look at your budget every day, but how often do you sort of reset those values within sort of those line items?
Sure. So actually, I don't look at my budget every day. I look at all my accounts. So maybe I was unclear when I was saying it earlier. So I want to make sure my checking account and my credit cards and all of that are what I think they are. But I'm not looking at the budget every day. I would say when I first made the budget, I looked at it maybe every week or two, because you have to live your life a little while for numbers to get in there. But I actually only adjust it once a year now. In other words, I get through a year, and the first year is always the clunkiest, right? Because you just don't know. You get through your first year and you realize, oh, I eat out more than I thought I do. I'll change that number, or I'll change my habit, one or the other. Or my rent is about to go up, or my rent is higher than I thought it was, or my car is costing me more or less than I thought. So you would change the numbers. You would go back at the end of the year, sort of early January, and look at what your year was the previous year, and then just enter new numbers for the new year. And then you're kind of done, because you don't want to play with it. The budget, you have to have a target, and then you stay on those targets as best as you can. And then after the year, if then those targets didn't work, then you just change the numbers, and then get it closer. Usually by the third budget, you're really close, unless your life is profoundly changing from year to year. But once a year, I think, is really the answer to that question.
Thank you, Larry. Another question is a large swath of our listeners today are young alumni. And so one person is asking the question, at what age did you know that your budget, that you were meeting the goals of your budget? Because I think a lot of times we have alumni who are in transit. They're in between gigs, or they're in between tours, or they're in between jobs. And especially at the beginning, it can seem hard to sort of get things balanced. So in your personal experience, at what age were you when you felt, okay, I think I've got a handle, even though things may still be crazy? At what age did you think you had a handle of your budget?
So I think what I'm hearing is the handle on a budget means it's in the black. It's finally running in the
Correct.
black. I would say mine has run in the black for a very, very long time. But to be fair, I have, remember, my first job was with Chicago Symphony at 19, and I had my first professional job as a trombonist at 20 in Hamilton, Ontario. So I was first trombone in the Hamilton Philharmonic at 20. So I always had income. I was never sort of in that place where there was a big struggle. So I totally understand what you're saying, because this is why I do this. My students come in and they talk to me about this. So I'm very aware of what you're talking about. I just personally did not experience it. My sense, though, is I think it's almost the same answer as the last question. It'll take you about 3 years of budgeting to realize and figure out if you have to move, if you have to change something, if you have to add a job. You'll figure it out in the first year, but by the third year, you'll probably have it sorted out so that everything's actually working the way you want it to work. And you just have to be patient as you kind of sort through it. What I can tell you is you'll start to very quickly save money. Every time you think about going out to dinner, you'll go, wait a minute, that's not in my budget. Or I could go below my budget this month if I don't go out for that dinner. Or that piece of clothing I was thinking of getting, gee, I don't really need to do that. Why don't I just save that this month? And you'll start to think very differently. And within a year, you'll be thinking very differently. And then within 3 years, I think you'll be in the black and sorting it out. The next webinar on investing, we'll start to talk about net worth, which is a different plus and minus, and we'll talk about that. It's not about your income and expenses, it's more about what you own and what you owe. Um, so let's say you have a mortgage which you owe, and then you have money in accounts or something. So that's also part of this whole equation of getting everything into, getting control over everything.
Larry, several other questions coming in terms of, let's see here, just want to make sure I get this question correct. In terms of new online banks with high interest rates or high APY versus a more traditional bank, do you have any thoughts about that in terms of as a person is building their budget? Is it easier, less easy? Perhaps you haven't been familiar with them.
Oh, I am. I'm familiar with them. Um, Remember what I said a couple times throughout the webinar, that those companies are trying to get your business because it makes them money. So they're going to give you a teaser rate, what's called a teaser rate. So currently I get 2% at Capital One or 360 Capital, I forget what they call themselves now, which is about the top you're going to get with somebody who's not going to change it and drop it back down in 6 months. And the truth is, unless you have $100,000 in an account, 1% isn't very much. It's not very much. So $100,000, 1% is $1,000. But I think we're probably talking about $2,000 or $3,000, which is $30. So the difference between 2% and 3%. So what I would suggest is to go to a bank that you would like to work with. I like Capital One very much for online, as far as getting a high interest rate is 2% right now. And really any bank for doing your checking, although probably Capital One does that too. I don't know. I don't use them for that. I use somebody else. But yeah, I think going with the highest rate because it affects you so little, it's not worth it. You want to go with the bank that you want to work with, that has good reviews, that you'll stay with for the next 20 years or 30 years. You don't want to be switching banks all the time. But those teaser rates are exactly that. They get you in and then they got you for the next 20 or 30 years. And that might not have been the bank you wanted to be with. So asking your friends who they're using, do they like them? Do they have good customer service? Do they make mistakes? Hopefully not. And pick a bank you like is really, until you're really making lots of money, and that's a whole separate discussion next time anyway, those accounts are only for short-term money anyway. You're not doing long-term investing at 2% or 3%. You're putting it in the stock market. So I would say don't worry about the teaser rates. Just pick a bank you like.
Great. We've got time for just two more quick questions. How should I prioritize saving for different things versus paying down my debt? Do you have any thoughts on that, Larry?
Yes. It's actually a much bigger answer, but let me try and make it a quick answer. In general, you want to pay down your debt first, because if you have credit card debt and you're paying 16%, no matter how much you're saving, you're losing. So if you have $1,000 in credit card debt, I would just make it a priority to pay off that $1,000 in credit card debt. You shouldn't be saving for anything else yet because you're not ready yet. But once you get yourself out of debt, you're able to start saving for other things. Now the caveat on that, of course, is if you want to buy a house or if you want to be saving for retirement, yes, you could be putting some money away, but I think retirement really is the only one you should be putting in, because that money does make you a lot over the long term and does kind of beat that 16% that the credit card companies are getting you for. So hopefully that's helpful, a helpful answer.
or at least a good start, right?
A good start. Yeah, it's a bigger question. It's almost a question I'd want to have a conversation with you, whoever that person is,
Yeah,
about, instead of just because I would want to ask some questions about where is your debt and how much is it, and what interest rate is it at, and what are your goals, all of that. But I think the short answer is just get out of debt as quickly as you can, and then you don't have this albatross, or this big ball and chain on your ankle holding you back, slowing you down.
that's great. Our last question today is regarding rainy day funds, rainy day accounts. Do you have any advice in terms of parameters or structure for setting something like that up?
Yes, and that will come up in the investing one, but I'm happy to talk about it a little bit now. You should start with $1,000, and Dave Ramsey talks about this, $1,000 in an emergency fund. If you don't have it yet, get there. And after you get to that, then you want to go for 3 to 6 months of income, which is going to be $5,000 to $20,000, depending on what you make, I guess, or more, I guess, in your emergency fund. And that means you're not taking money out of any retirement savings or house fund or anything when an emergency happens, because emergencies do happen. The other half of that is that the money should be put into the most secure, stable investment you can imagine, not the stock market, not real estate. It would go into a money market fund at the highest interest rate that you're comfortable with. In other words, pick a bank you like, and they'll give you 1% to 2%, and that's where that money would sit. So if you have $1,000, you might make $20 a year, but you know it's never going to be less than $1,000. It's never going to go down. It's always going to go up. And then you have that rainy day fund, that emergency fund started, and you just keep growing it until you get to 3 to 6 months, keeping it in a stable investment vehicle.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Larry. This has been incredibly informative. Just a big thank you to you for joining us this afternoon. If you have additional questions, you can reach Larry via email at lisaacson@berklee.edu. We want to thank all of our attendees for joining us for this inaugural program. We hope you've enjoyed today's program, and a special thanks to our Alumni Affairs Q&A curators, Joseph Driesen and Patrick Pharma. Today's webinar will be available beginning Monday, September 23rd via our Facebook page. And of course, since you have all registered for this webinar, we'll be able to send you a copy of the recording via email. So please keep an eye out for next month's webinar event invitation. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and now on Instagram with the handle @Berklee Alumni. We look forward to you tuning in next month for our Alumni Webinar Series. My name is Fritz Kuhnlens, and from all of us at Alumni Affairs, we hope you have a great day. Thanks again.